For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, my name's Sean. I'm one of the ministers here. And prior to coming to Campbell in 2020, I preached for a church in the western suburbs of Chicago. Here, I'm very blessed. I have basically a 2-minute walk to church. It is absolutely amazing. I love it, and I thank you for that very, very much. In the Chicagoland area, my commute was basically 15, 20, 25 minutes, depending upon the traffic. So a little bit more of a commute, nothing like some of you have. In some ways, though, I miss that commute because one thing that I loved to do during that drive time, was to listen to Chicago sports talk radio. It was very, very entertaining. In fact, I have a picture of the sports radio talk show host. That's them. Actually, that's not them. That is an old Saturday Night Live skit. But if you saw that, you get a feel for what those guys looked like and what the guys definitely sounded like on the radio station that I listened to. Now, one particular November morning, the conversation took a different twist. It took a turn. It went from talking about all things Bears to the radio talk show hosts sharing their personal plans for Thanksgiving Day. Ex-NFL lineman turned radio host Johnny Yurkovich, he said this. He said, here's my plan. He said, I plan on spending Thanksgiving Day enjoying a delicious Thanksgiving or turkey dinner at my parents' house. And then sometime mid-afternoon, my intention is to go to a nearby pub and have a beer. And what he said next, I'll never forget. He said it with a degree of levity and also vulnerability. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'm going to be looking for the answer to life's greatest questions at the bottom of that beer. And if I don't find the answers there, I'll have to look for them at the bottom of a second beer. Now, Yurka's not alone in his search, is he? There's a lot of ordinariness to life, but simple it is not. It is incredibly complex. And the complexity of life has left many of us wrestling with some very big, tough, important questions. And many of these questions have to do with God and with faith. And so over the next 7 weeks, we're going to dig in and dialogue about some of these big life questions. And during our time, this time together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the question. I'm going to offer a few thoughts, but I truly believe the real value of this sermon series will come from you being involved in conversation outside of this place with other people. I think that's absolutely vital. Let me be upfront. My intention is to begin the conversation. But at the same time, I recognize that the odds are I'm not going to answer these questions to anyone's complete satisfaction during our time together. These questions are way too big, way too complex to arrive at an answer in basically 20 to 25 minutes. It's for this reason I believe that many of you, if not most of you, are going to walk out of this place with this thought on your mind, but what about? You're going to hear me say some things, and you're going to be thinking, but what about? And that's why it's so important for you to continue this conversation with other people, to be able to unpack it a little bit further. And so we have right now 4 Explore God discussion groups that are going to take place throughout the week. In the Welcome Center, you'll find a list of those groups, meeting times and meeting places, and you're invited, you're welcome to join any one of those particular groups. The group that I'm hosting is my house. It'll be at 5:30 starting tonight. And so if that's something you're interested in, feel free to come join us. But you need to find a group. Or maybe if you're not ready to take that step, then you want to just have the conversation within your own family. You can find the discussion questions and also the videos that we'll be using on our app. All you have to do is go to the Campbell app, go to the media section, look at the Explore God banner, and there you'll find the videos and also the conversation questions so that you can begin or continue this conversation together. And so I really hope that you'll take advantage of that and spend some time doing that. Now, unfortunately, much like that sports talk host that I told you about, many people, for all practical purposes, they've really stopped looking for an answer. And I'll be the first to admit to you this morning, there are some questions in life that we'll probably never arrive at an answer for. And questions like, where does that one AWOL sock in the dryer really go to? Or who did assassinate JFK? Or why do some people consider soccer a sport? There are just some questions that are unknowable. They don't make sense. We're not going to have the answers to them anytime soon. Rowan Williams, in his book, Tokens of Trust, puts it well. He said, God has made what we can see and manage and what we can't see and can never manage. A universe, some of which we can get a grasp of and some of which we can't. This isn't a recommendation not to try to understand, but simply a reminder that not everything is going to be made sense of from our point of view. We need to be comfortable with mystery because it will always be a part of this life. However, I also believe that we can find some measure of explanation for most of the questions that do haunt us in life. Why do I believe that? Well, Wikipedia, of course. I mean, have you seen that fountain of information? It's amazing. You can find out so many things on Wikipedia. Actually, it's a bigger reason than that. I believe in a greater source. From the depths of my being, I believe there is a God who holds all knowledge and understanding. And I believe this God is so gracious that he wants to give us insight into the deep mysteries of life. Now, you may not share that same belief, and that's okay. It's all right. You don't have to share that belief. You're welcome here. You're valued here. This is not a place where you have to hide your doubts and your questions and your pushback and objections. Not at all. Just be who you are. You can give voice to those doubts. I would ask you don't do it in the middle of the message, preferably, but this is a place for dialogue. And we might not arrive at the same place at the end of these 7 weeks, but here's what I hope. I hope that you will find this to be a safe place for open and honest conversations. So let's get started. The question for today is, why are you here? Not why are you here at the Campbell Church, but really, why are you one of the roughly 8,063,384,000 or so people that are roaming this big blue planet? Is there a specific reason for your existence? That's one of the big questions that many of us begin to wrestle with at a fairly young age. Well, it didn't take too many years of doing the same thing day in and day out. You know, waking up, eating breakfast, going to school, coming home, doing homework, playing with some friends, having dinner, watching some TV, rinse and repeat day after day before the question of the meaning of life began to surface in my elementary age brain. And yes, there was a lot of fun to be had in life, but at the same time, there was so much of life that seemed monotonous and meaningless. Now, I couldn't articulate it in those exact words, but it was kind of the thought that was going through my mind at that time, and I imagine it's the thought that many of you began to wrestle with at a fairly young age. You started to ask and feel, is there a purpose to this? Does life have a purpose, and if so, what is it? Now, some of the brightest minds that the world has ever known, the answer that they have arrived at is simply this: there is no purpose to life. There just isn't. Hemingway may have summed up the perspective of those who hold this view best when he wrote, "Life is just a dirty trick, a short journey from nothingness to nothingness." Or maybe it was the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre who wrote, "It was true. I'd always realized it. I hadn't any right to exist at all. I had appeared by chance. I existed like a stone, a plant, a microbe. I could feel nothing to myself but an inconsequential buzzing. I was thinking that here we are eating and drinking to preserve our precious existence, and that there's nothing, absolutely no reason for existing." To quote someone a little more contemporary, David Baresh, biologist, also a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Washington, he emphatically claims in his book, Through a Glass Brightly, that science has now shown us that life in general, and our individual lives in particular, are inherently meaningless. It's a bold claim. It's a claim in which John Ortberg, minister, author, he pushes back and he says this: please show me one scientific study in any of the sciences that proves this. His point being is there isn't one. You cannot point to a scientific study in any of the sciences that proves emphatically that there is no meaning to life. However, this is where many or some people have arrived at, but not as many as you might imagine. The several studies indicate that roughly only 15% of the population holds this view that there is no meaning to life. Vast majority of people in the world today, they hold to this belief, they hold to a hope that there is some meaning to our existence. There's a reason for us being here. Now, it's also interesting to note that the majority of the 15% who hold the no purpose to life viewpoint, they do not believe in the existence of God. That doesn't come as a real shock, does it? It's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to find some meaning to life if you do not believe there is an author of life. British philosopher Bertrand Russell, a self-described atheist, he said this. He said, unless you assume a God, the question of the purpose of life is meaningless. And Cornell biologist William Provine makes a similar point when he writes this. He says, if it is true that we are just highly evolved biological cogs in the machine of random chance, then it means that there is no life after death, there is no right and wrong, and there is no ultimate meaning of life. Now, wait a minute, you might be thinking, I don't necessarily believe in the existence of God, but I believe that there is a purpose to life. And if that's what you're thinking this morning, I want to say fantastic. I am absolutely thrilled to hear that. And let me tell you why. It's for this reason. The belief that there is meaning to life is one of the greatest evidence, in my opinion, that there is a God who is responsible for your being. So think about it for just a moment. Does it really make any sense that evolution, absent of God, managed to deceive us into believing or needing a purpose that in fact doesn't exist? You don't find lower life forms wrestling with the questions of identity and purpose, do you? On the screen, you'll see a picture of my dog. This is Bentley. He looks a little stressed there. He's not, I can assure you that. Bentley has never stressed out because he's going through an identity crisis. He's never once mentioned to me, man, I feel so depressed because I don't feel like I'm living up to my full potential. It just doesn't happen. But I bump into people who are wrestling with these questions all of the time. Identity and purpose. If it's true that all we are is the highest of all forms of purposelessness, shouldn't we be at ease with our lack of purpose as much as my dog Bentley? There's an old proverb, it's a proverb of Zen masters, it goes something like this. The finger is excellent for pointing at the moon, but woe to the person who mistakes their finger for the moon. Okay, so if our insatiable curiosity about our purpose and our identity is pointing at something, what exactly is it pointing at? Isn't the most logical explanation that it is pointing out a creator who gave us identity and purpose? And if not, then what? Personally, I believe that's exactly right, that it is pointing to this creator who's given us this identity and purpose in life. And I personally agree with another follower of Jesus by the name of Paul, who a long, long time ago emphasized that every single person who exists, they have a reason for being here. They have a purpose, and God has a plan for them in this world. He put it simply like this in Scripture in a book called Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10. For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. Now, if you miss or dismiss this reality, there's a good chance that you're going to make some crazy things the focus of your life. I'll give you one example. A guy by the name of Rafael Lorenzo Jr., a software programming engineer or developer who lives in Texas. And several years ago, Rafael made the decision that the focus of his life would be to visit every single Starbucks location on the planet. And he did pretty well. He made it to 11,000 plus Starbucks before he began to realize that there's probably no possible way I can visit every single location before I die. Now, in one interview, he made this statement about this goal that he set for himself. He said, "Pointless though it may be, a goal is a goal." So what? This guy spent over $150,000 in years of his life traveling around to different Starbucks locations. That's crazy, isn't it? And yet, if we're honest, he's not alone in his pursuit of the meaningless. Many, if not most of us, are making huge sacrifices to chase dreams and goals and purposes in the life that at the end of the day are going to prove to be pretty meaningless. That's something that an ancient leader by the name of Solomon highlights for us in Scripture. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Solomon, let me tell you a little about him. Nearly 3,000 years ago, he was the third king of the nation of Israel. And under his leadership, that nation, they enjoyed a level of peace and prosperity that never experienced before, or really have experienced since. And there was no one at that time who was considered to be a wiser individual and more successful than this man, Solomon. I want you to listen to the way that he's described in Scripture in a book of the Bible called 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 23 and 24. It says, "King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart." Now, one of the things this brilliant man decided to do was to go on a quest for the ultimate meaning of life. So he searches, he goes out on this quest, and he decides to just give himself to everything that the world has to offer. He gives himself to nature and to knowledge and to work and to wealth, to achievement, to doing good, to all the pleasures of life from wine to women. And what did he discover? Well, I want you to listen to his words. These are recorded for us in a book of the Bible called Ecclesiastes, which is his personal journal of his search. And this is what he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 2, and then chapter 2 and verse 9 through 11. "Everything is meaningless," says the teacher, "completely meaningless. So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me. My wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. And there was nothing really worthwhile anywhere." There's so many things in this world that are good and a blessing in their own right. But what Solomon came to realize is that not a single one of them can truly satisfy you in the end. These things in life, they might give us a reason to get up in the morning. They might distract us for a season. They might entertain us for a few months or perhaps even a few years. But at the end of the day, what most of us realize is that we go to bed and we have this feeling inside of us that there's got to be something more to life, right? It's the same thing that we find a young Tom Brady expressing in a 60-minute interview way back in 2005. I want you to listen to what he shares here.
Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings? And and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is me. I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27, and what else is there for me?
What's the answer?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I mean,
I wish I knew. It's a lot of people feel. It's what a lot of people are wrestling with, perhaps many of us right here. I wish I knew. Solomon, though, he came to learn something very important. I want you to listen to where his search for meaning led him. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13 and 14. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Solomon had been taught this truth from the earliest of his days, but somewhere along the line he began to live as if it wasn't true. And it took the futileness of life to help remind him that ultimate meaning and reason for being it's not found in what's created in this world or the things of this world, but it's found in the one who created all the good and the beautiful that is in this world. And so he says, here is the meaning, here's the purpose for our existence. It is to fear God, and it is to keep his commandments. Well, what does it mean to fear God? Well, it doesn't mean that you live with this constant state of anxiety that this all-powerful, ill-tempered being is going to drop the proverbial hammer on you the moment that you mess up. I'm afraid that's the impression that many of us have or that we've grown up with. The God's just waiting for us, just to mess up, just to step out of line, and then he's going to get us because God's not really for us. But it's not the truth. God's not against you. God is for you. So much so that he took on flesh in Jesus so that he could come and be with you. He came to be with you to show you God's nature and to how to fully image God, because you've been created in his image, and ultimately to give up his own life to defeat evil and death so that you might live a life of hope and peace. So what is it to fear God? To fear God is simply to live with a great sense of awe of God, to live in awe of his goodness and his kindness, of his faithfulness and his power and his knowledge, his trustworthiness and his complete otherness. To fear God is to make the decision that you're going to live for his glory rather than your own. And so how do we best glorify God? Well, by keeping his commandments. Now, that may sound like a daunting task, right? I think there are a lot of commandments. But Jesus makes it very clear that it's not nearly as complicated as it sounds. In fact, on one particular occasion, a man came to Jesus and asked the question. He said, listen, out of all those commandments, which is the most important? And the answer that Jesus gave to that particular individual on that day was simply this. He said, this is the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength. And there's a second commandment, and the second commandment's like this: love your neighbor as yourself. And that's our purpose. It is to live a life of love. It is to love God with our entire being and then to love other people the way that we have been loved by God. This is what Jesus taught, and this is what Jesus demonstrated. I want you to listen to the words of Jesus in John chapter 15 and verse 9 and verse 12 through 13. I've loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. This is my commandment: love each other in the same way I have loved you. There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. This is our purpose. And when it's overlooked or it's ignored or we forget about it, then really terrible things take place. When this isn't your purpose, you end up with things like war, and you end up with racism and injustice. and abuse, physical and sexual. Of course, if there's no God, then none of that really matters. There's no reason to lose sleep over it. Because at the end of the day, evil and pain and suffering and one group of people dominating another, it's just natural selection working itself out, right? But most of us are not satisfied with that answer. There's something in us, an internal instinct that says it has to be different because people have value. And they matter. And they have purpose. And so as we wrap this up, here's what I want to impress upon us. That for things to be different in this broken world, it has to start with us fully living out our purpose. That we have to reorient our lives completely around this God of love who has called us to image him and his love to this world. And that's the only way this world will look different, is for you and I to live out this purpose. And so, as I said, some of you are thinking, but what about? That's good. Because I'm not suggesting I have an airtight presentation this morning. And if you want to continue that conversation, again, I want to invite you to come share it with people, knowing, at least please trusting, until we prove otherwise, that it's safe and it's okay to express doubts and objections. And we'll do this together. And we'll still be friends, even if we don't arrive at the same place. And for those of us who are here who, like Solomon, grew up with this understanding or this belief system that says there is a God who created us and he gave us identity and he gave us purpose, but somewhere along the way we lost our way and we've set new goals and they oriented around success and maybe popularity, or maybe it's about making money, or maybe it's about making a name, or whatever it is. I hope this will pull you back to this God who loves you and reminds you why you are here. It is to love the God who loves you, and it is to love the people that he gave his life for. Let's do that as well as we can this week.